So fast forward into the time you drop out, you find this crazy man named David Goggins, which I think at this point everyone knows what his deal is. Uh,
Yeah.
and this inspires you to. I purposefully didn't listen to Jeremy's podcast because I know I'd have you on soon, so I'll kind of
Mm.
have a fresh perspective on this. But
Oh,
I
that's good.
believe you ran some of your kind of like own homemade ultras, which I kind of did the same, but to a much smaller extent. But walk us through that and how you actually got from, okay, I'm running marathons, I'm having this kind of identity crisis and figuring out what I want to do with my life, and how
Mm-hmm.
that feeds into this interest in ultras and running your first official one with Leadville and so forth.
Yeah, yeah. So, um, the summer actually going into college, I read Goggins' book, and I did the audio book while I was on vacation in like 3 days.
Yeah.
Like, I listened to it while I was running. I
How'd you
loved
find
it
his
so
book? Because
much.
I found him through Joe's podcast, his first one with him.
Yeah, probably some podcasts because
Okay.
everyone would go on the podcast, then promote the book at the
Yeah,
end.
that's
And
right.
so,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah, so I probably heard him on a podcast. I'm like, who is this guy? Um, and so yeah, so I heard him. I was inspired. I end up going to college, right? And so I'm
Mm-hmm.
at USC. This is actually where my endurance or my ultra endurance starts because I'm inspired by this book. I'm thinking, I'm like, man, if Goggins can, run 100 miles without training, I could probably run it with training.
Mm-hmm.
And so through that belief, I was like, I'm gonna try it, and I forget exactly what caused it, but that was part of it. And I decided that during exam study days at USC, during one of those days, I would chart a 1.08 mile loop around campus, and I'd run it every. This was so weird. I don't know why I did this. Maybe just for, so I could rest, but I did the 1.08 mile loop every 15 minutes. And I figured if I just do it every 15 minutes for 12 hours, I can get over 50 miles. And it was like
Mm-hmm.
52 miles. And so I put together a flyer. I raised money for mental health because at that point, I'd really start to realize, man, like people are stressing so much about these exams and it's
Mm-hmm.
not worth it. Mental
Yeah.
mental health is super, super important, right? And so I did that, and it was a cool experience. And I just wanted to go further because I wanted to do the 100. And so I gradually worked my way up there. So fall of 2019, I did a 52 miler. Um, the spring, so May of 2020, so during COVID,
Mm-hmm.
I did a 60 miler. And then the next fall, when I had actually left USC, November of 2020, I did my first 100 miler. So what I did for all of these, the 60 and the 100 were at my home in Columbus, Ohio, and I charted a one mile loop and just ran it 100 times because I didn't know that there were these ultra marathon races like that I could just sign up for everywhere. And I
Mm-hmm.
think over the last couple years they've gotten a lot bigger.
They're definitely
But
bigger. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, but yeah, so I call it the Pure Showe Classic 60 miler and a 100 miler all on concrete.
So was it
And
Shao and not Show, and I just mispronounced it earlier?
it's Showe, it doesn't matter
Oh
though.
man,
Everyone
you should have hit me earlier. One question I have
I
about
don't care.
those homemade races, the Shao Classic, is how did you fuel for those? Because I'll give a little preamble about my homemade 50K. So like we were talking before we started the podcast, there was this little state park in Virginia that I was doing it at. Not a ton of elevation, but I was like, oh, if I do this, it basically is like an 18 mile. If I go 9 miles out and back, I'll do that like twice, so I can get close to like the 33 miles for 50K. And so I was like, all right, I'll do that. And I underestimated two things. One, it was a heat index of like 109 that day. So it was like a really bad timing. And then two, the bigger problem is I had like no fueling like for it. So
Mm.
I had a bladder with me that was whatever, and I kind of refilled that, but I barely used electrolytes. I had like some gels with me, but like nothing more. So I was probably intaking between like 50 and 100 calories an hour, and it was a complete shit show to make it simple.
Well, that's funny, but um Yeah, I mean, for my races, since they're a 1 mile loop, I always had like a table with like a bunch of stuff on it,
Okay, so you
and
kind of
I'd
snack
sit
throughout.
down. Yeah, yeah. So I'd snack throughout, and I had a couple friends stop by at the one at USC, and then my family was around during the
Mm-hmm.
ones I had in Ohio, and I didn't know a crazy amount about fueling, but I had done a half Ironman before, and
Okay.
I realized like, okay, I got to put stuff in my body,
Yeah.
and people around me were like shoving food down my throat, basically like, hey, here, you need to eat this, like,
Mm-hmm.
let's go, we need to eat more. And so that helped. Definitely didn't know much at all about electrolytes, um, and stuff like that, but I've grown to learn more and more
Yeah.
about that. And so yeah, I mean, I think it's just a process that you go through, and it's like trying to figure it out at first, but I think
Mm-hmm.
it's really simple once you kind of get it. And also it's an experimentation game,
Yeah. Yeah.
with
You
like
live and you
what works
learn.
best for you.
Yeah, and you
Yeah, like
find out through experience, right? Like you just said.